Welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. We have the CEO of U.S. Sailing, Alan Ostfield, and we're going to get through a number of discussions, but we've wanted to be able to talk to the guy at the top, so we've done that. Last year, we had a chance to talk to Paul Cahard about his vision with the Olympic program, in which you're involved with. So, first of all, taking the time out to talk to us, I really appreciate it. And
my pleasure, Greg.
Hopefully, you're having a great sort of end of winter. I want to go through a lot of background, but I want to start with the easiest question. And you are, you've been there since April of 2021, got hired in from Live Nation, and you've been involved in your background in basically spectator type events in sports and entertainment. You're now a part of more of a participant sport. Explain to me the transition for you and how maybe the ideals change for what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, when I started working in sports 25 years ago, like a lot of people, I went in there just for a love of sports and wanted to be part of an industry that I had a intrinsic interest in. And what I learned during my time with the Padres, with a great owner like John Moores and Larry Lucchino, and then with the great honor to work for Bill Davidson at the Pistons, is good sports teams, even though they are spectator sports, as you say, what they really are strong community assets. What they really are organizations that know how to leverage the power of sports to do something good in the world or do something good for business. So whatever you define good as, whether you define it as creating a phenomenal experience for participants, whether you define good as creating a great brand that sponsors want to align themselves to, or whether you define good as what the Pistons and Bill Davidson did, which is building reading and learning centers in downtown Detroit so that kids there would be more inclined to go to the libraries. Sports has the power to make a real difference if you leverage it properly. So when I started getting involved in the NGB space, I saw the same exact thing. And that's exactly at the heart of what U.S. Sailing does. So yeah, we handle the Olympics for sure and develop elite athletes, and that's wonderful. But we also do an incredible amount in the community to make a difference, whether it's teaching kids to sail safely or exposing the wonders of sailing to kids that would never otherwise have an opportunity to do it. And those are just a couple examples of how U.S. Sailing can use the power of sailing to make a difference in the world.
From a number standpoint, opportunity obviously means that you have numbers, and for Olympic programs or any other program, where does growth fit on your sort of bucket list of important ideals and what you're trying to accomplish? Is that a high priority, or does it fit somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, growth is really the singular priority, not because we want to make more money. We're not a privately held company that needs to make money and distribute revenue to the shareholders or the owners. But our task is to grow the business so that we can fulfill the mission of being the national governing body for sailing. And U.S. Sailing has been relatively stagnant for the past couple decades, from a membership perspective, from a program offering perspective, from a presence in the community perspective. So we need to grow our base. We need to grow our revenue base. We need to grow our sponsor base. We need to grow our membership base. And again, it's not so we make money. It's so we take that money that comes from that growth and then provide it back to the community. So we take better care of our volunteers. You mentioned a PRO at the start of the call. To be able to take better care of wonderful people who dedicate their great time to our activities. So we need to grow in all aspects just to give back to the sport in a more comprehensive way.
As an organization, if you guys, when you start to look at new plans, did you identify maybe 2 or 3 ideals of what you want to accomplish? But then the same part of that same question is, why have we suffered? Because the numbers aren't growing, obviously, in the United States.
Yeah, I think part of, and I'm not a sailor, so let's sort of start with that, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage. It's a disadvantage because I don't come with the history that comes along with growing up sailing the way a lot of people have. It's also an advantage because I don't come with that lens in mind, and I don't maybe look at it as narrowly as other people do. But what I've learned is that we've been stagnant. Look at our membership base; it's about 40,000, but there's about 4 million people in the United States that sail. So that's a boatload of people who love the sport as you do, as many others do, and who just aren't members of U.S. Sailing. Why? So what I've learned is that we've not done a good job of explaining the value of being a member of U.S. Sailing, of the reasons why one would do it. So that's just one example. I think sailing suffers from being viewed as an elitist sport or an elitist activity, and the barriers to entry here are significant. This isn't like basketball where you can get a ball and go to a park and start shooting hoops by yourself or with one friend. It's obviously slightly more complicated than that. So there's a lot of barriers to entry that go along with it. So you put, I think, those two things together, and then that dovetails back to what you asked me in the question before, which is how do we get enough revenue from our growth to be able to remove those barriers of entry? That's our task.
Involved a little bit with U.S. skiing. Paul Caird, we had a conversation with us last year at the end of the year, and he said one of the things you guys have done is sort of take a hard look at their model and their growth over the last, I don't know, 5, 10, 12 years. And they did basically the same kind of things. In order to have the kind of Olympic program you want to have, you can't have a base that doesn't have enough numbers. And numbers means opportunity because it develops those things. If you look at their headquarters, even in Salt Lake, it's, one of the best, but they've only built that in the last 6 or 7 years. So part of that process is finding numbers. And I'm assuming that's something that you guys take a hard look at.
Oh, for sure. Finding out how to grow membership, finding out how to grow people that are interested in the sport, finding ways to make it maybe more of a spectator sport than it has been before, finding ways to get more people to participate in our championships. All of those things are things that we think of and they really weren't being thought of for the years before. So there does seem to be some growth on the horizon as a result of just tapping into those normal growth activities.
We don't spend a lot of time with, and I've had this sort of a thread through a lot of conversations with folks who are involved at the highest level. We don't seem to have a lot of inside baseball, sandlot kind of sailing. Everything has to be, structured and set up. When you talk to people about junior sailing instructors, they don't ask if they can coach. They just tell you how great a sailor they were. And sometimes there's that disconnect because, again, you were in basketball. You can be the best sailor in the world, but if you can't, translate that information to somebody else listening, when you guys do your education and through John Pierce and some of those other programs, is more adding more fun to that, which is one of the tenets for U.S. skiing, is to stop spending so much time training and spend more time free skiing.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. This goes back to when you and I were kids and we wanted to play baseball. We just somehow got to the field on our own. We rode our bikes. We walked to the field. We had our gloves. We had our ball. We had our bat. And we just played for 6 hours and we somehow made it home. Right? The world's different now. It just doesn't function that way. And we spend more time in organized activities. We spend less time having fun. We spend more time putting pressure on people. We spend less time having fun. I agree with you that is not a recipe for future growth and future success and future happiness. So we do spend, clearly there are people who want to teach kids to sail at the highest level and to get them to work their way through the youth performance pathway. But there's also great programs that we have in our community sailing programs that just teach kids to have fun on the water. First, taking kids who may be scared of the water. They may be insecure about stepping on a boat just for all the obvious reasons. And getting those kids to feel comfortable and safe and secure on a boat, and then getting them to have fun, which is, whether playing tag on a boat or just starting to experience what happens when they move the sail one way or another and watching the wind pick it up and watching them take off. I think we're trying, a lot of our coaches, and this is one thing that I'm proud of, a lot of our coaches are not just sailing experts, but actually educational experts or development experts. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do exactly what you're saying.
Let me ask this question. Does the idea of being able to be a lifelong sailor and a racer and be competitive at a higher age, does that change the landscape from every other sport that we know about? Because basically speaking, if you participate in a sport, by the time you're through high school, you're done. And if you're going to participate, it tends to be coaching. That's not true of sailing. You can be competitive and be 50, 60 years old and still be a national level kind of sailor. Does that change the matrix of how we operate?
Yeah, I think it does for a lot of reasons, in part because of the very good question you're asking, but in part for um, just sailing as a lifetime, whether you want to be competitive or not, is also changing the equation. This is an activity, maybe like tennis, maybe like golf, where you can be competitive, whether socially competitive or actually competitive, um, throughout your adult years, and it absolutely changes the equation. We we want people to understand sailing is a lifetime sport, a lifetime activity. So whether it's you doing it with your kids and grandkids, or whether it's you competing in nationals as an adult, you can certainly do that. And I think it does change it. And what it does is it places a higher burden on us as the national governing body to just expose that to people, so they see exactly what you just said, and therefore want to get involved and stay involved and get their kids involved and compete at high levels.
Do you sail
That's
now?
all part of the growth.
Yep.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I'm blessed that right now. I mean, I love it. It's fun to go out. Obviously, I didn't grow up sailing, but to be able to go out like I do with Corey Sertle and Paul Kayard and Betsy Allison and Tony Ray. I mean, it's like you mentioned Larry Brown when we were catching up earlier. It's like shooting hoops with Larry. You
Right.
know, it's kind of a hoot.
If you can't learn something from that group, then God bless you. It comes from that.
Exactly.
I want to come back to U.S. sailing, but I want to add just a couple quick questions. You're a Pittsburgh guy, went to the University of Pennsylvania law school. Your first job, you worked obviously in the private sector, but you worked for the Padres. A lot of your personal background has been not only working in the entertainment and sports industry, but you have I seem a strong uh, direction towards being an adjunct professor at the various stops that you've had. So education seems to be a part of your background, both here at the University of Michigan when you were part of the Pistons, and that includes San Diego stops and New York. Is that something that you've always wanted to be a teacher, or is that explain that, and then maybe how does that fit with the job you have now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've thought about this a lot, never actually tying it to what I do now for U.S. Sailing. So it's wonderful to think of it in that way. When I first started working at the Padres, I realized a couple things. I realized that um, most of the good things in my life, most of the unique opportunities that I've had at that point in my life, were as a result of the wonderful education that my parents made sure I got. And I realized that, and then I realized I had a really unique professional opportunity being general counsel of the San Diego Padres. I mean, how many of those are out there? So I just decided I wanted to try to give back, and then that was my way of giving back a little bit. And then I realized I heard a great phrase after I was teaching for a couple of years, to teach is to learn again. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase as a
Yeah.
coach, but if you're teaching, you are continually learning. And for me, it was stimulating to be part of the academic environment. So I've now been an adjunct professor for what's now, I guess, 16 semesters. I'm actually teaching tonight at Columbia. And I love it. It keeps me sharp. The students, and I teach sports business, sports leadership. So the students are interested, they love the topic, and I get to share my experiences, but in a real academic environment. I think taking it to what I do now, that's obviously a big part of what we do. That is using sports to make a difference in these kids' academic lives. That's the same thing that sailing is doing. It's using the wonders of sailing to expose kids to things they might not otherwise get to see. So there is a nice corollary, and I appreciate you making me think of it that way.
San Diego to the Pistons, and we'd have to just make a brief stop here because obviously this is a local Great Lakes program. You had a chance to work for an organization at the top of its game. 2004, I think they won the World Championship. If I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
we won in '04, beat the Lakers, and then lost in '05 in Game 7 in San Antonio. We were up four with about 2.5 minutes to go. So that was a tough couple minutes.
How does one go from the wonderful weather of San Diego and that changing community at the time you were there, because they were the old stadium, were building downtown and going through that whole renovation, from that to what was eventually, Davidson building his own facility here, obviously the Palace, which is no longer there. Actually, I'm looking out my window and looking at what's now a parking lot. But I asked that question, that your experience, how do you go from baseball to basketball?
For me, it was about trying to expand my horizons. So I had at my law firm before I went to the Padres, we did some outside counsel work for Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys, and then I was in San Diego with the Padres, and then this opportunity came up to be the number two business guy at the Pistons and work for a great organization like Bill Davidson and Tom Wilson. And for me, it was I'd already had experience in the NFL through the Cowboys and Major League Baseball through the Padres to go work for Davidson and work for the NBA. And also, we owned the Tampa Bay Lightning. Bill owns the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I had the ability to add the NBA, the NHL, and also Bill owned two arenas, the Palace, as you say, and the Ice Palace in Tampa, Florida. And then two amphitheaters that you probably know well, Pine Knob or DT Energy Music Theater, and of course Meadowbrook. So for me, it was a great opportunity to expand my horizons. And fortunate, my wife was understanding. She was 6 months pregnant in San Diego. Her parents lived a couple hours north of us, and middle of January, and I said, "Guess what, honey? We're going to Michigan." So she was pretty good about that. So appreciative of that.
Well, from Michigan, I lived in San Diego for quite a while, 15 years. So coming back, I came back about the same time, not too different than you did. And we had, for the argument of transparency, my wife worked at the Pistons and worked in the same building you worked in for probably 25 years. So there was a commonality that sometimes makes it. We were talking earlier, obviously, about people that we have shared knowledge and friendships with. Does the Pistons experience then, obviously, with all the tickets you have to sell in that process, that's where Live Nation goes, right? I'm assuming that was the normal step.
Yeah, well, what it was there. So once Bill passed away, um, and then his family decided to sell the organization. I helped transition the sale to Tom Gores and Platinum Equity, and then it was time to move on, as those things tend to happen when a team is for sale. And I did my job for Bill and to help transition to the next owner. I've been there 11 years, and Live Nation called, and for me, it was the same sort of analysis I just gave you, which is how do I expand my career? How do I not do the same old, and go find something similar enough so I could step into a real position and add value, but yet different enough that it would be cool and exciting for another decade. And that's exactly what it was. And going to work for Live Nation, I never thought about being a concert promoter. I still don't consider myself a concert promoter, but working for the world leading live entertainment company, helping to run two of the largest markets that they have in the world was pretty cool.
You got out of a business just in time for finding itself in some focus at this point, as it terms their term and time in the barrel. From Live Nation, your predecessor, Jack, and I don't remember his last name, and I apologize, but Jack.
Jack Earhart.
Okay, let me start that over. I'll edit this. Your predecessor, Jack Earhart, was there for I think 10 or 12 years and very successful. He's now gone on to be the interim CEO of, I believe, fencing. And I'm not.
He was at fencing. He was at fencing as an interim, and I think he's now at another NGB as an interim. Yep.
So my question is, guys are running these kinds of organizations, fencing, sailing, wrestling, those kinds of organizations. A law degree is I'm assuming has to be first and foremost on your resume. And are those positions interchangeable in terms of the way you operate, or does each, from your experience, because you're on the board of U.S. Tennis, if I'm not mistaken, does those
I was.
organizations is there some similarities within those
Oh,
groups?
for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're all similar in some respects and different in others. And I mean, for me, practicing law was a phenomenal experience. I had a great opportunity to work for a wonderful law firm in DC that that helped me grow as a professional, helped me learn how to read better, write better, analyze, hold hands, solve problems, negotiate, argue when I had to. It was really and those skill sets I just gave you apply no matter what I'm doing for a living, whether it's practicing law or helping to run a basketball team or a national governing body. Those skill sets of being a good partner and analyzing and strategic thinking are skill sets that apply regardless of your industry. So for me, the law degree is a wonderful background. You don't need to be a lawyer to do what I do now, but like I said, the background is helpful. I think the skills one learns in being a leader of you can call it a sports organization, a community organization, a participant-driven organization, a spectator-driven organization, whatever you want to call it, being a leader of those organizations, thinking about how to connect with brands, thinking about how to make a difference in the community. Those are things that apply, whether it's Live Nation, the Pistons, USTA, wrestling, or US Sailing. There's really the same skill sets, and being a good leader, being a good business person, frankly, just being a good person, are just good skills to have no matter what you're doing.
We bring it back to U.S. Sailing in relation to 2023. In doing this show, you get a chance to do a lot of research. I went back and read a variety of information on U.S. Sailing as it relates to 1980, 60, and 40. And interestingly, the complaints at the time are almost the complaints of today, if you were to change those. And my point to that is that sometimes we overreacting to our growth or our demise or the lack of growth, or is it just one of those things that just happens to be at the forefront? Because if you read the history of it, it doesn't seem like it's really changed all that much over the years. And sometimes I think we make it bigger than it needs to be.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess it can cut both ways. It can cut both ways because the problems are what they are. The world is what it is. The sport and activity is what it is. So we're doing the best we can. It could also cut a more negative way, which is, have we not done the right things to try to attack some of those issues for decades? And maybe it's a little bit of both, Greg. I think that if the comments from 20 and 30 years ago, which is that we weren't doing enough to expose the wonders of this great sport and great activity to people and increase diversity in sailing, then I think we should try to do more. And then the question is, how much more can we do with what our revenue will allow us to do? So it's probably a little bit of both. And it's fascinating to hear that the same issues that we're dealing with now existed years ago. And I really hope, Greg, that we do an interview 5 years from now and you can't say that. I really hope that we've made progress.
There's some periodicals, if you go back and read some of the New York Yacht Club information from the 1940s after the war, there was guys complaining about the same stuff they're complaining at my club now, and it kind of translates over from that standpoint. So you've had a chance to settle in now. You'll be your second year anniversary coming up, actually your third year anniversary coming up in April. What's on tap for you? You just had the big honorary banquet where you had a chance to honor a whole bunch of folks, including some little people that have been on our show. But what's on tap for 2023 for you, and what do you want to accomplish this year?
So I think the best way to answer that is to talk for just a couple of minutes about what we were tasked to do for the past couple of years since I joined. The board about 2.5 years ago had the great courage and foresight to shake things up, which a lot of volunteer boards wouldn't do. They essentially turned over the whole executive staff. And for the past couple of years, and still continuing, we are in rebuilding mode. We are rebuilding the staff. We are rebuilding our level of staff quality. And it's wonderful now with a blend of existing history, like some of the people that we talked about before, the John Pierces of the world, the Betsy Allisons of the world, with some great new people as well. Hired a wonderful guy with Michigan ties, Andrew Clouston, Eric Krasnow. We've had a lot of new people come on board as well. So we're trying to do what I think good organizations do, which is blend the old with the new, so you get the benefit of historical perspective and experience, but also some fresh ideas. So we've been doing that for the past couple of years, increasing our communication with our members. So doing all of sort of core foundational things. And where we are now in 23 and 24, now that I think the foundation of our house is in order or close to in order, is starting to build. So now that we have a proper team in place, let's grow our membership base. So that's sort of point number one. Now that we have our house in order, let's grow our sponsorship base. Let's make sure that we can connect with the companies that want to benefit from one of the things that is otherwise a detriment. So we're a pretty unique, sometimes viewed as elitist sport. Well, by definition, the demographics of the people that participate in this sport are really, really highly attractive to a lot of corporate partners. So let's leverage that. Let's do a better job with our philanthropic activities. And I think now's the time that if we can do those three things, then we're going to increase our revenue which will allow us to increase the services. So that's on tap for 23 and 24.
What do you do to get rid of an elitist perception? Is it marketing or is it more than marketing?
Well, um, I think it depends on how you define marketing, but I would say it's at least two things. It's creating programs that remove the barriers to entry. So we have one program called the Siebel Sailors Program, which its fundamental objective is to do with the same thing that the program that you described early on does in your region, which is remove the barriers to entry. So inner city kids or kids that wouldn't otherwise have this great opportunity can experience this. So we try to do that in a way that's different than, hey, let's take kids out to sail and see what happens. But we try to get kids in there, we get the families involved, so we try to make it a durable program so that they want to sail for a lifetime. So that's sort of point number one. I think point number two, which is a marketing point to some degree, which is just making sure that we're communicating with the world in a way that the world wants to be communicated with in 2023. So are we showing ourselves in the way that people would view us as accessible? And if we're just showing big boats that cost millions of dollars that people can't do, then that's unattainable. But on the other hand, if we're showing these kids with these huge smiles on their face, experiencing the joys of sailing, if we're showing that in the proper way, then I think we're going to do a good job of making people say, I can do that. I want to do that.
Last couple questions. If you're running a business, for-profit business, growth is easily seen in the P&L statement. In an organization like U.S. Sailing, it's a little harder to see and to translate. So my question is, how long does it take for you, or how long does it take for us to see your imprint in a general sense on the actual organization? 3 to 5 years?
I would say 3 to 5 years from now. A lot of the growth that we've been doing the past 2 years are, I'd say 60-70% of the growth that we've been doing for the past 2 years have been behind the scenes, because you don't see what we're doing to build the organizational structure, because how would you, right? You're not in our office. What you want to see is, what are we offering to members? What kind of programs are we offering in the community? How are we best serving the community? And I think we've done some of that over the past 2 years. But going forward, now that our house is relatively in order or close to in order, I think you're going to start seeing more of that. So it takes a lot longer than I would have thought when I joined U.S. Sailing. The people on the board who knew more about the organization, of course, than I did, have come to call this a 125-year-old startup. We've been around for 125 years. We really are starting up again. So
Okay.
if you look at it that way, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you will start to see the growth, and the growth will come in the P&L, not because I want to make more money to have more profit, but I want to have more revenue so I can spend more money. And I think you'll see that.
Well, that was part of Paul's conversation, is that, until you build the endowment to a point where it can be effective, and again, effective is just opportunity, which means that more people can participate. The rest of it and it took the U.S. ski team almost a decade. We noticed for years, we're a bunch of ski coaches. All of our national championships until the early 80s came from east or out in the Rockies. We all live in 350 vertical foot hills, and we wanted our kids to compete nationally. So we figured out a way to put kids on the hill. If you go up to Buck Hill, if you go up to Nubbs Knob, we started that program in the middle 80s. And, the Lindsey Vaughns and the Michaela Schifrins all came out of the Midwest. So we found a different way to do it. So my question, the follow-up to that is sailing headed towards, is the innovation, especially at the younger levels, is it foil? And I say that because Sail GP has put a ton of information and effort into, especially when they visit Chicago and San Francisco. A lot of kids are on those smaller boats. Do you see that as a monohull type thing, or do you see it as a multi-process? You see foiling as part of the future?
Oh yeah, not foiling and kiting and kite foiling, all of those things. It's like when you and I were kids and the X Games came along, and we didn't know what this thing was called the X Games, right? And it was this crazy activity that just got more kids interested in whatever the activity was. And snowboarding was the same thing. Snowboarding when you and I were kids wasn't what it is now. And I think that for to your question a couple questions ago, what's gonna help us grow the sport? It's having a kid look at foiling and say, "Boy, that's a blast." It's like when you and I were kids and we had that commercial. This is not your father's Oldsmobile. Well,
Right.
this is not your father's sailing. And I think that when you look at the kiting and the foiling and how fast the boats go and how exciting it is, it's phenomenal. We were just doing a presentation with NBC Sports, and we showed them that this is the fastest summer sport with how fast some of the boats can go when they're on foil. So it's a completely different thing of sailing than anyone would otherwise think it was.
We'll be in Pensacola next week as part of we're going down to visit the America's Cup guys. And it's just a whole nother, it's just a whole nother level of not only fun, but fear, because those guys are fearless. And it's like you and I trying to jump into an Indy car, an open wheel car at Indy, and try and go 200 miles an hour. We're not going to last very long because those guys are athletes and we're not. I mean, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah, exactly. Like you and I know how to drive on 75, but we don't know how to do that. It's a
yeah,
completely different world.
no, I completely understand. Well, listen, I
Yeah.
really appreciate you taking the time. It looks like U.S. Sailing is in great hands, and with your background, I have no doubts there's gonna be an indelible imprint from your process. So, thanks for taking the time, and we appreciate all the work that you do.
Thank you for the kind words, and I really appreciate talking with you, and I appreciate the support with the logo behind and the hat you're wearing. So thanks very much.
Bought that with my own money.
Love it.